I've been pretty harsh on the Nintendo Switch's god-awful online offerings pretty much since day one, since they announced the initial tier of the service. The online play in Nintendo's games are pretty embarrassing even by like 2005 online gaming standards. In terms of online play, online functionality, it's as bare bones as you can get, really. And then, of course, there are the retro game offerings that are supposed to kind of beef up the value of all these tiers. Most recently, we got the heavily controversial $50 per year Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack that added Sega Genesis and N64 ROMs. The price, again, completely ridiculous in my opinion. Going off of the heavy amount of dislikes the announcement video got, it didn't sit well with many other people either. But it seems like it may be set to get a little bit better, because Nintendo possibly had a pretty big leak come out yesterday. An official Nintendo emulator for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance began floating around, which suggests that these classic handhelds may be set to make their way to the Nintendo Online service. In the leak, now, before I even get into it, there is some debate over the validity of it, of course, as always. And obviously, even if this is real, if this is an official emulator thing that Nintendo has commissioned, it may not even end up seeing the light of day. In terms of viability, I do think these systems make the most sense in terms of the next ones Nintendo would want to add to the service. We're getting to the point where you've got to do some actual work to bring new systems on. I mean, you talk about something like the DS and 3DS, with the dual screens, I'm sure there'd be some issues there. Wii with the motion controls. We know they're never touching GameCube. You'll probably have PlayStation 2 games, God of War, on NSO before GameCube games. So regardless of whether or not even these leaks end up being real, I don't think you have many other options in terms of stuff that should be incredibly easy to just slap on the service. And GBA in particular does have a solid lineup of games that could come over, many of which are referenced in these leaks. Like in these files, there are a ton of games listed as being tested with the emulator that people are freaking out about. Would be amazing if they all ended up being playable on Switch, but again, even if this emulator is real, even if they end up bringing these consoles to Nintendo Switch Online, all of the games that were supposedly tested here may not, in fact, probably won't make it on there. With that said, there are references to a lot of games that you just would assume at this point would come alongside these handheld systems. Your Mario Karts, online multiplayer for these games. Just as with the other consoles we've seen, you'd probably expect some new online multiplayer features. But if we are talking handheld games, let's be honest, there's one franchise that could easily make or break this thing. Could we possibly be in store for a suite of great classic Pokemon games on Nintendo Switch? We've gotten some of the older games in the past, like Red and Blue, right, on the 3DS. I'm super nostalgic for the OG games. They're the ones I grew up with. But honestly, I don't think they'd be anything to really write home about. But the potential of getting those GBA ones, Fire Red, Leaf Green, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, that alone, I think, would sell a lot of people on this service. I'll admit it's not the most likely. Obviously, Pokemon is a franchise that they milk with the least amount of effort. But man, even just the possibility of that is exciting. Again, this is the franchise that I think if you treated right in a set of retro handheld offerings, you really could get a lot of people to jump on board with. One of the things that jumped out to me in regards to this series was in with the online features where they listed a Pokemon trading tool. Now, to reiterate, I don't expect Nintendo, the Pokemon Company, Game Freak, to do anything but the bare minimum with this franchise. But if I was running the show, if I had my say, yeah, I'd go all out with Pokemon. If we're doing this, like, could you imagine not only having all these big games from all these eras, but having a trading system that could not only work across all these games, the earlier generations of Pokemon, but even further, could easily work with Pokemon Home, the current storage service? Again, getting these games alone would be cool, but if we could get more of the retro games that work easily with Home, You know, you've got full-on schematics detailing all the hoops you have to jump through with older games and bank. Getting them from bank to home is a whole thing. I think there actually is a way you can get Gen 3 all the way from Gen 3 to Pokemon Home, but it'd probably be much easier to just like cure cancer or something like that instead. Something like that would definitely be intriguing. Metroid Fusion is another one. I was saying in the lead up to Dread how it was a complete joke that Fusion wasn't playable on the Switch before that game came out. Still is stupid, I think, that it wasn't already there in anticipation for Dread. I know after Dread we've got a lot of newer Metroid fans who surely haven't played that game. Zero Mission you could put on there as well. Now I don't want to just like go through like every game I'd want to see on here, but of course there is one title that would 100% break the internet if it did come over with this suite of games. Mother 3. This game has been the white whale for Western Nintendo fans pretty much forever. It'd be a big deal if we got an official localization, no matter how you slice it. And they did kind of make a thing just recently out of the other Earthbound games coming over in the last Nintendo Direct. Like, instead of having just a random update trailer as they did with many of the past games, and that could be a setup of sorts for this game. Like, Mother 3 with an official translation is something you could put in a Nintendo Direct and have it be perhaps the big moment of the show. This game would almost certainly be in a Japanese selection of GBA offerings, but if we got, again, that Western version, that'd be a big deal. I will say, though, as with all the games on this service, really, but especially something like Mother 3, again, with all this time people have been begging for this game, it would really suck to finally get it and have it tied to this service. Like, have no way for us to buy the game outright. I'd be glad, again, to have the official version at all, but yeah, having it tied to a service would lower the hype for me. If there's any game that I think, again, they'd have to do a single buy with like they did with Fire Emblem, it would be this game. Like, you'd have to let people buy Mother 3. But overall, this is definitely something I'd be excited for. Again, I can think of a ton of games that I'd want to see come over as part of this, but you know, I was also cautiously optimistic about the initial expansion pack before we knew, you know, all the details, the pricing and that. And once I did learn those details, the selection of games, the slow-ass rollout, the quality of emulation, which admittedly that has improved since launch, but still, once I learned all the details, I was more insulted than anything, and I'd have a lot of the same questions then here. I'd have to assume the emulation at least would have to be solid. Like, it can't be that hard, even for a company as incompetent as Nintendo, to get Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games running on the Switch. The selection, though, of course, the rollout of more games is very concerning, as well as, don't forget, this is key for me, how these systems would affect the other consoles. Once we got N64 and Genesis, the NES and SNES pretty much just died. We went, what, like 6 months or whatever with nothing? 0 games getting added to those consoles until, again, just recently, the Earthbound games. So that's super concerning. Like, do they start throttling the N64 releases after these new consoles? Which they're already only doing like 1 a month. Maybe they start alternating 1 month N64, 1 month a game from all of these different handhelds. And if that happens at that point, what are our hopes for more NES and Super Nintendo games for us basic tier plebs? I mean, are we just screwed? If the N64 rollout put us on the back burner for 6 months, what is this going to do? With them trying to manage both N64 and now these Game Boy systems. And speaking of the tiers, where does this fall? My hope would be if these systems get added that they do get added in addition to the expansion pack. I'd love it to be the case where they throw basic tier plebs a bone, but I mean, this is Nintendo. I highly doubt that. I don't think us people in the basic tier, I don't think we're getting anything else for free, boys. If we were talking about just Game Boy and Game Boy Color alone, I could see it as a possibility, and maybe they could get just those games. You know, the Game Boy and Game Boy Color does go to the basic tier, but you need like the expansion pack to get GBA. That's a possibility, but I feel like they probably wouldn't want to confuse people, like separating this stuff out. So I see it all getting put on the expansion pack tier. And on the opposite side, if they made it a higher price tier, or bumped up the price of the expansion pack when they bring this in, that's a possibility too. They add this in and say, oh, well now the price of the expansion pack is going up. We're giving you all this value. If that ended up happening, I'd feel kind of like I do now, that the expansion pack is just a total ripoff. I don't care if they just made it like another $10 per year, because yeah, like I said, I already think the expansion pack isn't worth it as it is. So bumping up the price $10 and adding some GBA and Game Boy Color games, that's not going to do it for me either. And again, you've got all those other concerns I mentioned that are based on how bad Nintendo has handled this service up until now. Don't forget, it's not like when I bring this stuff up that I don't have a firm basis or reason to be worried about things like the games being drip-fed out. We've already, that is what we've experienced since the beginning now. So yeah, if this was done right, if they didn't charge any extra for these games, at least beyond the current expansion pack price, it had a solid lineup of titles at launch with a steady flow added and doesn't kill the flow for the other consoles on the service, then I could see myself subbing to it. I still want to make this clear. I still wouldn't be like super impressed by the service overall, probably at least, but with these additions, I could see the value being there. But still, once more, given the past, what is the likelihood that this all ends up actually coming true? I'm doubtful. I'd love for it to happen. I'd love for Nintendo to make this worth our while. Again, to have all those classics on there, I think that'd be phenomenal. But Nintendo hasn't given me much reason to be hopeful for it. And also, I want to say before I close, I think this whole online service thing has been so tainted in the eyes of many people. It's just been handled so poorly that I don't really know if Nintendo has it in them to do something that would totally reverse that course, that would drum up a ton of genuine excitement for it. I don't know if Game Boy games at all. I don't even know if having the perfect rollout for these systems can do it. I think you need some bigger heavy hitters like GameCube. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and GBA games possibly making their way over to the Switch in the comments. What games would you like to see make it over? And could this get you to upgrade to the expansion pack if you haven't already? As always, I'm the Shy Guy, Johnny Zakari, and thanks for watching.